Hello, Unlockers. So many of us ADHDers have complicated relationships with our family members, and our family dynamics can be pretty challenging, especially if there's diagnosed or maybe even undiagnosed neurodiversity amongst our relatives, which is statistically quite likely. We might find ourselves maybe triggering each other or repeating old patterns of behaviour, having the same kind of conversations over and over again, people repeating the same kind of behaviours over and over again. So that can be really, really painful for us. And this topic of family dynamics is one of the most tricky that we've covered in Unlocked. So today I wanted to share an exercise that might help you to show up during those difficult interactions a bit more prepared. So what we're going to do is we're going to be writing a letter to our inner child or childhood self. So this exercise might seem quite strange at first, but what it can help you to do is be more self-compassionate and also more aware of your own needs and boundaries, and then you can be better equipped to communicate more clearly with your family members, which is something that we struggle a lot with because we don't have such a strong sense of self. We receive a lot of criticism as children, way more than our neurotypical counterparts, and so this exercise can be really helpful for those addressing those things because they often play into our family dynamics. So I should say before we get started that this exercise should be done when your tank is full and when you're feeling emotionally ready to confront some stuff that could be quite painful, and it might be worth considering doing it with a therapist, especially if you have a history of more complex trauma within your family or perhaps a trusted friend, and it's totally okay to not feel ready to take this on. I've borrowed the skeleton of it from a counsellor called Blake D. Bauer, but it's commonly written about within the psychology community, so feel free to Google for further prompts, but this is just kind of the basic way to write a letter to your childhood self. So you want to start by kind of grounding yourself a bit. Might want to take a few deep breaths, and then it might also help to visualise yourself sitting with a younger version of yourself, perhaps at a time that you remember experiencing some challenging family dynamics that were when they were first playing out, if they're things that tend to repeat themselves. So then you want to begin the exercise by just asking yourself, as the adult version of you, what would you want to tell your younger self if you were given the chance to do that? And what would they need to know or want to hear at this age that you're imagining them being? If you could go back in time and encourage or affirm anything to them, what would you say? And then when you've contemplated these kinds of questions for some time and some material is starting to come up, some things that you might want to write down, you can begin to write your letter, dear, and then your name, and then reflect on what your inner child needed to hear and whether this helps you to see any of your current family dynamics any differently. If you're kind of struggling to figure that out, I'll give you an example. So this is an example I might think might be quite common to a lot of members of Unlocked and people with ADHD in general. So maybe when you were a child, you received a lot of criticism for your ADHD traits, which then obviously impacted your self-esteem. So does that make it hard then to receive feedback in your current family dynamics as an adult? Perhaps this reflection could help you be more mindful of how to react to triggers around receiving feedback from family members. You might also reflect that whether you could, in good conscience, repeat that same criticism that you heard as a child to your childhood self now you're an adult. If you imagine yourself recreating that dynamic, how does that make you feel? Perhaps you reflect that your childhood self is deserving of more kindness and compassion. Perhaps then that leads you to think maybe you could extend that compassion to your adult self. How does that feel? And maybe would that help you to assert more healthy boundaries with your family members now that you have a sense of what your needs are and that you are deserving of having those needs met? So that's just a brief example that I thought might be quite common to quite a lot of us. That would probably take you some time, and I wouldn't encourage you to take this next step until you're ready, but the next step in the exercise would be to perhaps write a response from your inner child to yourself now as an adult. So some prompts for you. What would they want to tell you as an adult? What would they want you to know or hear right now in your life? What wisdom does your such and such year old self need to encourage in you as an adult right now? Asking yourselves these questions, you might then notice some situations or maybe relationships that you're being guided to address in your life. So this can be quite a helpful back and forth. Maybe you might want to write a response to the response. You can take it as far as you want, but a lot of people find that just that even the first letter helps them to recognise some things and reframe some of the dynamics that they're playing out with their families. Also, some extra food for thought, you might want to consider what your family members may wish to say in their letters and whether or not that might help you to empathise with them during difficult conversations where we often might get triggered or just frustrated that somebody isn't doing what we want them to do. Perhaps they're struggling too. Maybe this is an exercise that they're not open to, but you can imagine what they might say, and that could help you to feel more empathetic and patient with them. We all need a bit more patience with our family members, don't we? So that is the exercise. I really hope that you found this fruitful, and just make sure that you be really kind to yourselves. It is difficult, but it's definitely worthwhile, and I hope that it helps.